Her knuckles were wide on the yoke, the student's voice cracking through the headset. Wind's pushing me left. Correct it, now. Sarah's tone was sharp, clipped. No time for comfort. The Cessna bounced once, twice before settling. A decent landing, she barely had time to breathe before her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, almost. Miss Mitchell. The voice on the other end was pure authority, measured, steel-edged. This is Colonel Rodriguez, Pentagon. I need you in Portland in 2 hours. She started to protest. He cut her off. Your schedule's cleared. This isn't a request. It wasn't the command in his voice that froze her. It was the fact that she'd heard that tone before. 5 years and a lifetime ago, in places where refusing wasn't an option. And the last time it had meant life or death. Sarah didn't know yet that in less than 48 hours she'd be asked to fly into a place the world pretended didn't exist. That somewhere out there a pilot she'd never met was still alive against impossible odds. And that a field of energy, growing every day, was eating the ocean like fire through dry grass. But she knew one thing. If she walked away now, she'd regret it for the rest of her life. Tell me where to meet you, she said. And just like that, the quiet life she'd fought for was over. Sarah Mitchell was midway through coaching her third student of the day through a tricky crosswind landing when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, an unfamiliar number. Normally she would have ignored it, but something in her gut made her swipe to answer. The voice on the other end was steady, clipped, unmistakably military. Ms. Mitchell, this is Colonel James Rodriguez from the Pentagon. I need to see you immediately. His tone left no room for misunderstanding. Not later in the week, not tomorrow, today. And I can't tell you why over the phone. That was it. No small talk, no explanation. The day had begun like any other Tuesday at Riverside Municipal Airport in Oregon. Sarah had rolled in at 6:30 a.m., 45 minutes before her first lesson, cradling her dented thermos of black coffee and carrying her father's old leather flight bag. At 32, she'd been an instructor for almost 8 years, patiently transforming jittery newcomers into confident pilots. The job was steady and predictable, exactly what she'd wanted after leaving the military 5 years earlier. Her office sat tucked into the far corner of the flight school. Wide windows framed the runway, where Cessna 172s and Piper Cherokees practiced touch-and-go landings all day long. The walls were plastered with sectional charts, printed weather forecasts, and photos of beaming students on their first solo flights. A small American flag stood upright on her desk beside a neat stack of unsigned logbooks. Her first student that morning had been Marcus Chun, a software engineer from Portland who made the drive twice a week to chase his boyhood dream of becoming a pilot. They'd spent an hour drilling radio calls and traffic pattern procedures. Marcus still hesitated when keying the mic, his voice cracking slightly when requesting takeoff clearance. But Sarah could see him improving, little by little, with every session. Her second student, Jennifer Walsh, was a nurse with ambitions of flying medical supply missions to remote hospitals. That lesson had been all about emergency procedures. Sarah cut the throttle midair to simulate engine failures, forcing Jennifer to pick a landing site fast and work through the emergency checklist in the correct order. Jennifer's calm, systematic approach, honed from years in medicine, translated perfectly to aviation under pressure. It was between lessons, as Sarah was reviewing weather updates for the afternoon flights, that the call came. Mitchell, the voice said, crisp and authoritative. This is Colonel Rodriguez from the Department of Defense. I need to speak with you regarding a matter of national security. Can you be at Portland International Airport's main terminal in 2 hours? Her stomach tightened. She hadn't heard from anyone in uniform since the day she left the Air Force. Her record was spotless, commendable even, but the colonel's tone told her this was not a social check-in. Colonel, I'm in the middle of my workday. I have students. Miss Mitchell, he cut in. I understand this is inconvenient, but this is a priority situation. I've already spoken to your employer. Your afternoon flights have been reassigned. Silence stretched on the line. Sarah's eyes drifted to the runway outside her office window. A student's small plane bounced awkwardly before settling on the asphalt. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. What's this regarding? She asked. I can't discuss details over an unsecured line. Terminal B, Gate 12. Look for a man in a gray suit reading a newspaper. 2 hours, Miss Mitchell. Click. The line went dead. Sarah lowered the phone slowly, her fingers trembling, an involuntary response she hadn't felt since her last combat mission in Afghanistan. She had spent years building this quiet, structured life, choosing flight instruction precisely because it kept her in the air without the chaos and danger of combat. Her work now was about teaching people to fly for the joy of it, not to destroy or defend. But her past had apparently decided it wasn't finished with her. Her service had been brief but remarkable. 4 years flying F-16 Fighting Falcons, with 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. She'd logged 127 combat missions, earned 3 air medals, and been awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross for a particularly harrowing close air support run near Kandahar. She'd been one of only a dozen women flying the F-16 at the time, shattering barriers while simply trying to do her job. Her discharge had been her choice, one she hadn't made lightly. Too many friends had been lost, either to enemy fire or equipment failure. She wanted to keep flying, but not with death as a constant passenger. Teaching others had been her way of holding on to the skies without the shadows. Now, someone from the Pentagon wanted to see her. And just like that, the peace she'd fought to build suddenly felt fragile. She called her boss, Frank Morrison, the school's owner. Frank, a retired airline captain, had opened the school after hitting the mandatory retirement age of 65. "Everything all right, Sarah? That guy sounded pretty official," he said. "I honestly don't know, Frank. Hopefully it's just some paperwork from my discharge. I'll be back tomorrow morning." "Take whatever time you need," Frank said, his voice warm but edged with concern. "And Sarah, be careful." She grabbed her keys and headed out to her Ford pickup, the same one she'd driven since leaving the service. The 90-minute drive to Portland International took her past stretches of Oregon's green countryside, but she barely registered the view. Her mind kept looping over the same question. What could the Pentagon possibly want with a flight instructor from a small-town airport? Her military clearance had lapsed years ago. She'd never been involved in intelligence, special programs, or anything beyond standard fighter tactics. Air-to-air, close air support, basic dogfighting. None of it seemed relevant now. Still, the uncertainty prickled at her. Somewhere along the highway, she realized she was checking her rear-view mirror more than usual. She told herself it was just nerves. Still, the feeling stuck. By the time she reached the airport, the terminals were bustling with mid-afternoon travelers. She parked in the short-term garage and walked toward Terminal B. Gate 12 sat near the far end of the concourse, past a coffee shop selling local blends and shelves of Oregon-themed souvenirs. Sure enough, there he was, a man in a gray suit, aviator sunglasses on indoors, reading the Wall Street Journal, exactly as described. She approached cautiously. "Colonel Rodriguez?" He looked up, nodded once. Early 50s, graying hair, posture that spoke of decades in command. His handshake was firm and deliberate. "Miss Mitchell, thank you for coming on short notice. Let's find somewhere more private." They moved to a quiet corner overlooking the runway. Sarah's gaze followed a United 737 pushing back from the gate as the colonel opened a manila folder. "Miss Mitchell, I'll be direct. The Department of Defense has a situation that requires your specific skills and experience. Before I go on, you need to understand that everything I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level." Her pulse jumped. "Sir, my clearance expired years ago." "We know. If you agree to hear me out, you'll be read back into a compartmentalized program on a temporary basis. But once you hear this briefing, you're bound to secrecy, whether or not you accept the mission." His words hung in the air. Outside, another aircraft began taxiing toward the runway, its exhaust distorting the afternoon heat. Sarah sat in the terminal, sunlight spilling across the worn linoleum floor. Her thoughts drifted, not to distant battlefields or classified briefings, but to her students, to the quiet life she'd built with such deliberate care. She had fought hard for her peace, carved it out of years of chaos. Yet here she was, facing a situation that felt like a fissure opening beneath her feet. Not just any situation, the kind that could decide whether American forces made it home alive from their next mission or didn't. The kind that called for someone with a rare fusion of skill, experience, and a mind wired to stay steady when the ground shifted. Sarah turned toward Colonel Rodriguez. His face was set in stone, the weight of whatever he was about to say pressing into the air between them. This wasn't routine military business. I need to know more before I can agree to anything, she said. Rodriguez gave a single, sober nod and slid a photograph from the folder on his lap. The image stopped her cold. It was a military aircraft, but nothing like she had ever seen. Its shape was sharp, almost predatory, with surfaces that seemed to bend the light around them, as if reality itself was reluctant to touch it. Ms. Mitchell, Rodriguez said, his voice heavy, you're looking at the most advanced stealth aircraft ever built, 15 years in development, over $40 billion. 3 weeks ago, something went wrong during a test flight. And now we have a problem, not just for the program, but for American air dominance for the next generation. Sarah leaned in, her eyes tracing the alien-like contours. It looked like it had leapt straight out of a science fiction film. The lines were deliberate, every angle calculated for invisibility. What happened during the test flight? She asked. Rodriguez's jaw tightened. The aircraft didn't come back. We lost contact 200 miles into the mission. Search and rescue found no wreckage, no debris, nothing. It simply vanished. Mechanical failure? Pilot error? He shook his head. The pilot was one of our best, former Thunderbird leader, over 4,000 flight hours. The systems all checked out. Weather was perfect. There was no reason for anything to fail. Despite the warm air in the terminal, Sarah felt a prickle of cold at the back of her neck. You think it was shot down? We don't know. But what we do know is this. If that aircraft falls into the wrong hands, even a single component, we're looking at a catastrophic breach. The radar-defeating tech alone would wipe out our entire air defense network overnight. And the AI flight systems, if turned against us, would be devastating. Sarah didn't need more explanation. If that jet was still intact, it wasn't just a lost asset, it was the largest intelligence disaster in U.S. military history. What does this have to do with me? I flew F-16s, not experimental stealth projects. Because, Ms. Mitchell, we believe the aircraft is still operational, and we need someone who can fly a recovery mission unlike anything ever attempted. From the folder, Rodriguez pulled out another photo, this time of her. She stood in full Air Force gear beside an F-16, helmet under her arm, confidence blazing from her younger self's eyes. It had been taken just before her final combat mission in Afghanistan. Your record speaks for itself, Rodriguez said. Exceptional under pressure, missions behind enemy lines, adaptable under fire, operational security, even under threat of capture. And your psych profile? You handle isolation and uncertainty better than 98% of combat pilots. Sarah looked at the photograph. The woman in it had been fearless, ready to prove herself in a male-dominated field. That woman had since walked away, choosing instead the calm skies of civilian flight instruction. Colonel, I haven't flown military in 5 years. I train hobby pilots in Cessnas and Pipers. There are active duty flyers far more qualified. Under normal circumstances, yes, but these aren't normal circumstances. Rodriguez leaned in, lowering his voice. The missing aircraft's last known heading was toward the Bermuda Triangle. The words landed like a stone in her chest. She'd heard the stories, ships and planes vanishing, compasses spinning wildly, electronics dying without reason, folklore and conspiracy fodder, not the stuff of Pentagon briefings. With all due respect, sir, the Bermuda Triangle is a myth. It's just busy shipping lanes, bad weather, and human error. Rodriguez said nothing. Instead, he produced a tablet, its screen showing satellite imagery from 3 weeks earlier. The sleek, angular shape of the stealth aircraft moved steadily across the frame. Watch the timestamp, he instructed. Sarah leaned closer. At precisely 14:47:33, the image began to distort, warping like a mirage, then vanished entirely. Equipment malfunction? She asked, though the doubt in her voice betrayed her. We thought so too, until we checked Navy radar from a destroyer 180 miles away. Same thing. 2 independent tracking systems don't fail the same way at the exact same second. Sarah's mind churned. In all her years of service, she'd never seen tech interference on that scale. What's the official story? Catastrophic systems failure. Crash. No recovery possible. Case closed. And unofficially? Rodriguez powered down the tablet. Unofficially, we've got a $40 billion aircraft with the most classified tech in existence, sitting somewhere it shouldn't be, maybe in enemy hands. She glanced at the ordinary travelers rushing by, people whose biggest worries were flight delays and missing luggage. Assuming I believe you, and I'm not saying I do, what exactly would this mission involve? He told her about the X-47 Delta, an upgraded stealth aircraft, single seat, long range, with reinforced shielding against electromagnetic interference. The plan, fly into the same zone where contact had been lost and locate the original craft, alone, covering 50,000 square miles of open ocean. Her stomach nodded. She'd flown solo missions before, but never over that much water, in an experimental aircraft chasing a ghost. Why not send an active duty pilot? Rodriguez's expression darkened. Because everyone we've sent into that area has experienced the same thing. Comms blackouts, navigation failures, disorientation. 3 reconnaissance flights have returned with memory gaps and severe psychological side effects. What kind of effects? Confusion, time distortion, hallucinations. One pilot swore he'd been airborne 8 hours when his fuel burn showed only 2. Another claimed he'd encountered, the words sounded absurd, almost laughable, aircraft from World War II still engaged in combat missions? Sarah's gaze stayed locked on Colonel Rodriguez, her face carefully composed. But inside, her mind was doing the math, trying to reconcile what she'd just heard with reality. The logical, disciplined part of her brain rejected it outright. Impossible. Outlandish. Something you'd hear in a bad documentary about conspiracy theories. But her military training had left her with another habit. You didn't dismiss a potential threat just because it sounded unlikely. Evidence came before assumptions, and situations had a way of proving reality far stranger than theory. And you think I'd be immune to whatever effects are causing this? She asked, her voice steady but edged with skepticism. Not immune, Rodriguez corrected, but better equipped to handle them. Your psychological profile shows exceptional resistance to disorientation and stress-induced hallucinations. Sarah frowned slightly, the muscles in her jaw tightening. More importantly, he went on, your combat record includes operations where reality itself seemed unstable. He was referring to her last mission in Afghanistan, the one that had followed her like a shadow long after she left active duty, the mission that had finally tipped the scales, making her walk away from the Air Force for good. She had never talked about the details with anyone outside her chain of command, but apparently her official reports had said more than she'd realized. It had been a close air support mission, called in for a special forces unit pinned down in a narrow mountain valley. It should have been routine: find the target, neutralize the threat, get the ground team out. Instead, it had turned into 6 relentless hours of combat, every moment bent by conditions that simply didn't make sense. Her radio communications had cut in and out without warning. Navigation systems failed again and again, forcing her to fly almost blind in terrain that could kill a pilot for the smallest miscalculation. And the weather she'd flown through formations that hadn't appeared on a single meteorological report, phenomena that seemed to form and vanish like they were alive. By the time she'd limped back to base, she'd burned through every single piece of ordnance, pushed her aircraft far beyond its operational limits, and somehow, still not entirely sure how, kept the ground team alive. Later, intelligence called it anomalous atmospheric conditions. She'd been awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for her actions. But medals didn't erase the memory of that day. They didn't stop the gnawing question of what had really happened up there, or why it had shaken her so deeply. I remember reading your after-action report, Rodriguez said, his eyes steady on hers. You stayed operational despite equipment failures, comm blackouts, and environmental conditions that grounded other pilots. That adaptability is exactly what we need for this operation. Sarah turned toward the terminal window, letting her eyes follow a Southwest Airlines 737 as it climbed into the afternoon haze, carrying its easy mix of business travelers and vacationers towards safe, predictable destinations. Normal people going to normal places for normal reasons. What happened to the test pilot of the original aircraft? She asked without looking away from the glass. Captain Rebecca Torres, Rodriguez replied. 15 years of military flight experience, including 5 years as a test pilot, one of the best in the program. He reached into his folder and produced another photograph, this one showing a woman in a flight suit, standing beside what Sarah guessed was the missing stealth aircraft. Captain Torres had the look of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. Confident, professional, sharp. No trace of her, Rodriguez said quietly. None. But we believe she might still be alive. Sarah's head turned sharply. A chill ran the length of her spine. What kind of reason? For the first time since they'd begun talking, the colonel hesitated. When he spoke again, his voice carried an uncertainty that somehow made his earlier claims feel even more dangerous. 4 days ago, we picked up a transmission on an emergency frequency. Distorted, but traceable. It originated from the same region where Torres vanished. The voice pattern matches hers. What did it say? Still alive, aircraft intact, cannot return, do not send rescue. Then nothing. Her pulse quickened. A pilot stranded in the Bermuda Triangle, sitting in a $40 billion aircraft, unable to return for reasons no one could explain. It sounded like a bad sci-fi plot, but the look on Rodriguez's face said he believed every word. That could have been anyone, she countered. Voice analysis isn't perfect. We thought that too, until we enhanced the signal. There was background noise, engine sounds, electronic systems, radio chatter. The engine signature matched the missing stealth aircraft exactly. Sarah pushed herself to her feet and walked closer to the glass, needing space to think. The logical part of her brain screamed this was impossible, but there was the weight of the briefing, the formality in his voice, the urgency that only came with orders from very high up. Colonel, let's say for a moment that I believe you, she said at last. Why do you think I could succeed where others have failed? Because you're not active duty anymore. You don't think like a military pilot. You think like a civilian flight instructor. That difference in mindset may be exactly what's needed to survive whatever's happening out there. She faced him again. And if I refuse, then we find someone else. But Ms. Mitchell, his tone sharpened, I've reviewed every qualified pilot in the military. You're our best shot at bringing Torres home and at recovering technology that could alter the balance of world power. The words settled on her shoulders with a familiar weight. She had carried lives, missions, and the safety of others before. She'd thought those days were over, but the universe, it seemed, wasn't finished with her yet. I'll need details on the aircraft, she said finally. Capabilities, limitations, everything. For the first time, Rodriguez allowed himself a small smile. Does that mean you're considering it? It means I'm not stupid enough to say yes without knowing what I'd be getting into. He opened the folder again, pulling out a thick, black, leather-bound manual with no markings. She knew the look and feel of classified documents. X-47 Delta specifications and operating procedures, he said. You have 48 hours to review it. If you agree, training begins immediately in Nevada. She accepted it, surprised by its weight. Whatever this aircraft was, it was far more complex than the F-16s she'd flown. How long is the training? 2 weeks of intensive simulation and systems work, 3 days of live flight testing. Even for a seasoned pilot, this technology will take adjustment. What kind of technology? Rodriguez glanced around to make sure no one was close enough to overhear. Neural interface controls, responsive to pilot thought as well as manual input. Adaptive camouflage that alters the visual signature in real time. Propulsion technology that... He hesitated, then smiled faintly. Let's just say it makes conventional jet engines look primitive. A shiver moved through her again. She'd heard the rumors during her service, whispers about aircraft that push physics to its limits, but she'd filed them away as the product of bored pilots with too much imagination. And you want me to fly something like that, she said slowly, into an area where aircraft vanish? Miss Mitchell, I won't lie. The risk is significant. But if we don't recover this technology, the consequences for American security will be catastrophic. Other nations are developing stealth platforms. This prototype's advances could tip the scales. Sarah thought of her flight students back home. Marcus Chone, still fumbling radio calls but stubborn in his determination to earn his license. Jennifer Walsh, planning to fly patients to remote hospitals. Frank Morrison, who built his school from nothing to pass on his love of aviation. Their risks were about weather, mechanical issues, and pilot error, not about disappearing into some cursed airspace or safeguarding tech that could change global power. Someone else had to deal with that. Someone had to take the dangerous flights so others could keep living ordinary, peaceful lives. She had walked away from that duty once, but maybe that duty hadn't walked away from her. "Colonel," she said quietly, "I need a straight answer." "Of course." "Do you really believe Captain Torres is still alive?" Rodriguez was silent for a long moment. Sarah stood by the wide glass window, eyes fixed on the runway, where another aircraft crouched at the edge of the tarmac, engines roaring softly in anticipation. Beyond it, the horizon glowed faintly in the last wash of twilight. "3 weeks ago, Miss Mitchell," Colonel Rodriguez said, his voice low but unshakable, "I would have told you this was impossible. But I've seen the evidence, I've heard the transmissions, I've reviewed the data from multiple independent sources." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Something extraordinary is happening out there. Something that challenges everything we think we know about physics and reality itself." He turned to face her directly, locking eyes in a steady, deliberate gaze. "Whether Captain Torres is alive or dead, whether the aircraft is recoverable or lost forever, we have to try. Because if we don't, and this technology falls into the wrong hands, the consequences will be far worse than losing a single pilot and one aircraft." Sarah didn't reply. The ride back to Riverside was silent, her mind miles away from the familiar Oregon scenery gliding past her windows. On the passenger seat lay the classified manual, a solid physical reminder of the decision she now faced. She passed rows of darkened evergreens, the faint scent of wet pine drifting through the vent, yet her thoughts hovered thousands of miles east, somewhere over an uncharted patch of the Atlantic where the laws of reality apparently bent into strange, dangerous shapes. When she reached the flight school, the place was wrapped in quiet. Frank had locked up for the night, leaving only the dim glow of security lights spilling across the hangar. Inside, a dozen small aircraft sat lined in patient silence, ready for tomorrow's lessons. Sarah remained in her truck for several minutes, staring through the windshield at the Cessna 172 she'd flown that morning with Marcus Chen. Just 8 hours earlier, her biggest concern had been guiding a nervous software engineer through crosswind landings. Her apartment, a modest 2-bedroom overlooking the Willamette River, reflected the life she had built after the military, practical, uncluttered, stripped down to essentials. Years of deployments had taught her the art of traveling light. She made herself a cup of tea and settled into the worn comfort of her reading chair with the manual in hand. The first page carried a stark warning about unauthorized disclosure, followed by clearance protocols, ones that technically no longer applied to her. The X-47 Delta was unlike anything in the conventional military arsenal. Its specifications read more like the synopsis of a science fiction novel than an aerospace engineering document. Maximum altitude, 80,000 feet. Range, 4,000 nautical miles without refueling. Top speed, classified, but the propulsion schematics hinted at capabilities far beyond anything a standard jet engine could manage. But the most remarkable feature wasn't its speed or range. It was the neural interface technology. According to the documentation, the aircraft could read the pilot's brainwaves, interpret them through an advanced AI system, and translate thought directly into flight control, while still allowing for manual input. This wasn't just a machine that followed commands. It could anticipate them, compensate for human error, and maintain peak performance even under crushing stress. Sarah had flown fly-by-wire aircraft before, but never anything that blurred the line between human and machine to this extent. The manual warned that early adaptation might cause disorientation, headaches, even temporary memory gaps as the brain rewired itself to communicate with the system. Then there was the adaptive camouflage, thousands of microscopic cells embedded in the aircraft's skin, capable of shifting color and pattern to mirror the surroundings. To the naked eye, even at close range, the X-47 Delta would be a ghost. Paired with its radar-deflecting stealth geometry, it could all but vanish from the modern battlefield. The propulsion section was heavily redacted. Still, the unclassified fragments hinted at some form of electromagnetic field manipulation, not combustion. Performance charts suggested the Delta could accelerate, decelerate, and maneuver in ways that would make conventional aerodynamic principles seem irrelevant. Closing the manual, Sarah walked to her kitchen window. From here, she could see the faint outline of the airport where her old life waited. Tomorrow morning, Marcus Chen would arrive to practice the radio calls they had worked on today. Jennifer Walsh would continue prepping for her medical supply runs. Frank would complain about FAA paperwork, even as he secretly savored the chance to help new pilots fall in love with the sky. It was a good life, a quiet one, exactly the kind she had chosen after leaving the service. But somewhere far out in the Atlantic, Captain Rebecca Torres was trapped, alongside a piece of technology that could shift the balance of global power. And for reasons Sarah didn't fully understand, the Pentagon believed she was the only one who could bring both home. Her phone rang at 11 p.m. She didn't need to check the screen to know it was Colonel Rodriguez. "Miss Mitchell, I know it's late," he began, "but we've received another transmission." Sarah's pulse jumped. "From Captain Torres?" "We believe so. This one was clearer than the first. I'm sending you an encrypted audio file. You'll need to open it on the tablet I left in your truck." Sarah blinked. She hadn't noticed any tablet when she'd picked up the manual. Checking her bicycle, she found it wedged under the passenger seat, a rugged military-issue device that came alive with the press of her thumb. The audio was short, but the voice was unmistakable. "Day 21, a woman said, her tone strained but steady. "Still alive. Aircraft are functional, unable to return due to the temporal displacement field. Recommend immediate halt to all recovery attempts. Repeat, do not send anyone else. The field is expanding." Static swallowed the rest. Sarah replayed it 3 times, listening closely. Beneath the hiss and crackle, she caught the faint whir of aircraft systems, the electronic hum of onboard equipment, and something else. A low, rhythmic pulse, almost like a heartbeat, woven into the static. Her phone rang again. "What's your assessment, Miss Mitchell?" "If that's really Captain Torres," Sarah said slowly, "she's been missing for 3 weeks, yet says it's been 21 days. That matches the time distortion effects you mentioned earlier." "What else did you hear?" She hesitated. "There's a pulse in the background. Not normal radio interference." "Our analyst noted the same thing. Frequency analysis suggests some form of electromagnetic resonance, possibly natural, but unlike anything we've encountered." "And the temporal displacement field?" She pressed. "That's complicated," Rodriguez admitted. "Our theoretical physics team believes it could be a localized distortion in space-time, possibly triggered by unknown magnetic or gravitational anomalies in that region." Sarah sat heavily at the kitchen table. She had faced enemy fire, mechanical failure, violent storms, but time distortion and electromagnetic anomalies were beyond anything in her training. And if Torres was right about the field expanding, this wasn't just about one pilot or one aircraft. It could threaten shipping lanes, commercial flights, maybe even coastlines. The thought hit her like a punch. If the phenomenon reached the eastern seaboard, millions could be in danger. "Why hasn't this been given to NASA or civilian researchers?" she asked. "Because that aircraft contains classified technology. If civilians got involved, we'd lose control of the data, and hostile nations could exploit it." Sarah understood, but it meant the military was about to send people blind into something no one fully understood. Exactly the kind of mission that made experienced pilots vanish from the records. "I need to see the training facility," she said finally. "Does that mean you're accepting?" "It means I'm not making a decision based on diagrams and recordings. If you expect me to fly into whatever trap Torres, I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." Rodriguez paused. "Miss Mitchell, once you visit and get the security briefing, you're in. Whether you accept or not, the information you'll see can't be unlearned." Sarah glanced toward the darkened airfield. A single security light cast its pale glow over the limp windsock. The stillness pressed in around her. Safety, predictability, normalcy, that's what they called it. But where was the facility? "Groom Lake, Nevada. We can have transportation arranged for you tomorrow," the colonel had said. By the next afternoon, Sarah would be standing in Groom Lake, Area 51 itself. She'd heard the rumors for years, of course. Whispers about a top-secret testing ground, cloaked in the kind of security that left no paper trail. But never, not once, had she imagined she'd receive a personal invitation to step inside. How long would the evaluation take, she'd asked. 48 hours minimum, came the answer. You'll undergo psychological testing, a full physical evaluation, and preliminary exposure to the X-47 Delta systems. If you prove compatible with the neural interface technology, we'll proceed directly to the full training program. So Sarah had felt it then, that invisible shift in the air when life divides into a before and an after. She could turn it all down, walk away, and return to her peaceful days as a flight instructor. She could go back to the rhythm of training young pilots, hoping someone else would uncover the truth about the missing aircraft. Or she could step once more into the shadows, into the world of classified programs, experimental technology, and missions that tested the outer limits of human understanding. Colonel, she said finally, I want to speak with someone who understands the Bermuda Triangle phenomenon from a scientific perspective, not just military intelligence. That can be arranged, Rodriguez replied without hesitation. Dr. Emily Harrison, MIT. She's been consulting for the project, one of the top experts on electromagnetic anomalies and their effect on navigation systems. How soon can I speak to her? She's flying to Groom Lake tomorrow. You could meet her as part of your evaluation. The decision came to Sarah the way combat instincts often had. Fast, sharp, undeniable. She didn't fully grasp the risks, couldn't predict the outcome. But years of training had taught her that some situations demanded action, even when certainty was impossible. Arrange the transportation, Colonel. I'll be ready by tomorrow afternoon. He didn't smile. Miss Mitchell, I want to be clear about what you're agreeing to. If you are compatible with the X-47 Delta systems and complete training, you'll be expected to fly the recovery mission within 72 hours. The expanding field means we don't have the luxury of waiting for perfect conditions. Understood, she said evenly. One more question. What happens if I don't come back? Colonel Rodriguez paused, his silence stretching just long enough for the weight of it to settle. Officially, he said at last, you'll have died in a training accident involving classified aircraft. Your family will receive full military honors and benefits. Unofficially, his voice tightened, we'll have lost our best chance at finding Captain Torres and retrieving technology that could decide the future of American air superiority. When the call ended, Sarah walked slowly through her apartment, letting her eyes rest on the life she'd built over the last 5 years. Photographs from her service days hung alongside snapshots of smiling flight students, each one frozen in that moment of triumph after their first solo flight. Her bookshelf stood heavy with technical manuals, aviation histories, and the novels she'd been meaning to read. In the refrigerator, takeout containers stacked beside a bottle of wine she'd been saving for the right moment, a moment that had never come. It was the life of someone who had found peace after too much conflict. Someone who had chosen simplicity after years of chaos. But it was also the life of someone quietly avoiding the world's hardest problems rather than facing them. That night, she didn't sleep. She stayed at her desk reading the X-47 Delta manual cover to cover, absorbing each diagram, each system specification, each emergency procedure. The aircraft was the pinnacle of aerospace technology, built with advances that bent the edges of physics and engineering. Flying it would be the challenge of a lifetime, if she survived training long enough to try one. By dawn, Sarah was behind the wheel of her car, heading to Riverside Municipal Airport. It might be her last day as a civilian flight instructor. Frank was already there, as he always was, thermos of coffee in hand and worry in his eyes. How'd the meeting go yesterday, he asked. Sarah chose her words carefully. The government's offered me a temporary consulting position. It'll require extended travel. I can't discuss the details. Frank watched her closely, the kind of look you get from someone who spent 40 years reading people under stress. This isn't about discharge paperwork, is it? No, it's not. Are you going to take the job? Her gaze drifted to the row of planes across the tarmac. Marcus Chun's Cessna 172 sat ready for his morning pattern work and radio practice. Jennifer Walsh's favorite aircraft was still in maintenance, but would be ready for her afternoon emergency procedures session. Frank, I need you to take over my students for the next few weeks. maybe longer. His expression tightened. How dangerous is this consulting job? I honestly don't know, Sarah admitted. But if something happens to me, make sure Marcus knows he's ready for his check ride. His radio work is improving every day, and his landings are better than he thinks. And Jennifer, she's got the instincts to be an outstanding pilot. Her emergency procedures are already stronger than some commercial license holders. Just make sure she doesn't rush through training. She has a habit of wanting to go faster than the curriculum allows. Frank nodded, his jaw set. When do you leave? This afternoon. They spent the morning reviewing every student file, strengths, weaknesses, learning styles, motivations, planning lessons as if preparing for a long deployment. By noon, a black sedan with government plates pulled up outside. A woman in a tailored business suit stepped out. Miss Mitchell, I'm Agent Lisa Chambers. I'll be escorting you to your appointment. Sarah gathered her overnight bag in the classified manual. Frank walked her to the car, his voice quiet but steady. Be careful, Sarah. Whatever this is, remember you've got people here who care what happens to you. I'll remember. As the sedan rolled away, the airport grew smaller in the rearview mirror. In a few hours, she'd be inside one of the most restricted facilities in the country, preparing for a mission that could either secure the future of American air power or erase her name into the same mystery that had claimed so many others. Through the tinted glass, the Nevada desert stretched out in endless, sun-bleached miles, so empty it might as well have been another planet. Agent Chambers drove in near silence for the 4 hours from Las Vegas, speaking only to confirm arrival time and security procedures. Sarah used the quiet to keep studying the X-47 Delta manual, committing its systems and emergency protocols to memory. At last, the checkpoint came into view. Guard towers rose from the sand like steel watchmen, bristling with sensors and comm arrays. The perimeter fence stretched to the horizon, topped with razor wire and warning signs that left no doubt about the cost of trespassing. The security process was exhaustive. Sarah surrendered her belongings, underwent biometric scans, and signed papers acknowledging levels of classification that officially did not exist. A military doctor examined her eyes, reflexes, and cardiovascular response to stress. Colonel Rodriguez met her in a sterile briefing room adorned only with an American flag and a photograph of the current president. His face was drawn, as though he'd barely slept since their meeting in Portland. Miss Mitchell, thank you for coming. Before we begin, I need to inform you there have been developments since yesterday. Sarah felt her stomach knot. What kind of developments? We've received 3 more transmissions from Captain Torres. Each one confirms the temporal displacement field is expanding faster than we projected. He tapped a wall display, bringing up a map of the Atlantic Ocean. A red circle marked the original location where contact with the stealth aircraft had been lost. Orange and yellow rings showed its projected expansion over time. Based on Captain Torres's reports, the affected area has grown from roughly 100 square miles to more than 500 in just 24 hours had passed, yet the anomaly had already grown at an alarming pace. If it kept expanding at this rate, the world's busiest shipping lanes would be compromised within a week. Sarah stood over the projection display, her pilot's mind instinctively mapping out the distances, estimating trajectories, and calculating the cascading consequences. Her thoughts narrowed to one pressing question. What happens to the ships that enter the field? She asked. Colonel Rodriguez's voice was measured but heavy. We don't know. For now, commercial vessels had been rerouted under the guise of a large-scale military exercise. But even as he said it, the colonel's face betrayed the truth. Such a cover story wouldn't hold forever. If this expansion reaches coastal areas, his expression darkened, the words carrying the weight of a grim forecast. Theoretical models suggest catastrophic effects. Power grids could fail. Communications networks could collapse. And we could be looking at widespread temporal distortions affecting millions. Sarah felt the familiar crushing weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, just as it had countless times in her military career. She'd flown missions where failure meant losing battles or comrades. But this was different. The scope of what was at stake dwarfed anything she had ever faced. Colonel, she began slowly, her voice edged with skepticism, if this field is expanding that fast, What makes you think one aircraft can make any difference? His answer was quick and deliberate. Because Captain Torres isn't just trapped inside, she's studying it. Her most recent transmissions contain technical data suggesting the field might be artificially generated, not a natural occurrence. A chill rippled through Sarah despite the climate-controlled air. You're saying someone's doing this on purpose? Rodriguez didn't flinch. We're saying the electromagnetic signatures don't match anything found in nature. The patterns are too regular, too perfectly calibrated to be accidental. The realization struck Sarah like a physical blow. If the temporal displacement field wasn't a freak of nature, but a deliberate creation, then someone out there possessed technology far beyond anything known. Technology that made even the stolen stealth aircraft seem crude and outdated. The mission was no longer just about recovering advanced hardware. It was about confronting an unknown force with the power to reshape reality itself. Who has that kind of capability? She asked. That's what we intend to find out, Rodriguez said, which brings us to Dr. Harrison. As if summoned by her name, the briefing room door swung open. A woman in her early 40s stepped in, dressed in a faded navy sweatshirt and worn jeans. At first glance, she looked more like a grad student on a coffee break than one of the world's foremost authorities on electromagnetic anomalies. But her eyes, sharp, unyielding, carried the quiet intensity of someone who spent her life wrestling with the universe's most elusive truths. Ms. Mitchell, she said warmly, extending her hand, I've been looking forward to meeting you. Colonel Rodriguez tells me you're considering flying straight into what may be the most significant scientific phenomenon in human history. Sarah shook her hand, noting the firm grip, the steady gaze, traits of someone completely at home in dangerous intellectual territory. Doctor, I need to know what exactly I'd be flying into. The specs make it sound impossible. Doctor, Harrison's lips curved into the faint smile of a teacher about to explain a concept few could grasp. She crossed to the display and brought up a map. Let's start with what we know about the Bermuda Triangle, she said. Forget the myths. It's actually one of the most heavily studied regions of ocean on Earth, largely because of how much shipping passes through it. She highlighted sections on the map as she spoke. The area sits over geological formations that produce unusual electromagnetic effects, underwater methane deposits, magnetic iron ore seams, and deep ocean currents that generate electrical fields. Normally, these cause only minor navigational quirks, nothing experienced captains and pilots can't handle. But something's changed, Sarah said quietly. Exactly. 3 weeks ago, our sensors detected electromagnetic pulses from the region, magnitudes stronger than anything ever recorded here. And the patterns, they suggest artificial amplification of the triangle's natural properties. She switched to a new display, jagged frequency waveforms, dense layers of electromagnetic field measurements. Someone, Harrison continued, has found a way to weaponize the triangle. They've created a localized distortion in space-time, disrupting everything from radio comms to gravitational stability. Sarah studied the data, trying to translate numbers and graphs into the sensations a pilot would feel. What would that actually be like from the cockpit? According to Captain Torres's reports, and those from others who've skirted the perimeter, you'd feel extreme disorientation. Your instruments might contradict what your eyes see. Time itself could speed up or slow down. Distances could warp. Systems would malfunction without warning. Sarah's brow furrowed. Is the X-47 Delta even built to handle that? Colonel Rodriguez answered. The neural interface system should help you stay oriented, even if every instrument goes down. It can cut through electromagnetic interference and navigate using quantum positioning. No reliance on GPS or beacons. Dr. Harrison leaned forward. Her voice softened, but the gravity in her tone deepened. Ms. Mitchell, I have to be honest. The X-47 Delta has never been tested in an environment like this. The neural link might falter under temporal distortion. Quantum navigation might fail under unknown interference. And adaptive camouflage. We don't know what it does in a place where physics itself is negotiable. Sarah respected that candor. Too many military briefings smoothed over the unknown with confident lies that reality later shredded. Then tell me, what's your professional take on our chances? If this were natural, Harrison said after a pause. I'd say the odds are fair. The X-47 is built for extremes and your record shows you adapt quickly. But if this is truly artificial, then you'll be flying an experimental jet against an adversary with technology decades beyond ours. An adversary who's already trapped one of our best pilots in what is, for all intents and purposes, an alternate reality. Silence filled the room. Sarah's eyes drifted to the map, the angry red zone growing outward like a spreading wound. Somewhere in there, Captain Torres was alive, experiencing time differently, still feeding back knowledge about something that bent human understanding. Finally, Sarah spoke. I want to see the X-47 Delta. Rodriguez nodded. Dr. Harrison will come with us. She's been working with the development team to fine-tune the systems for what you'll face. They walked down long corridors lined with framed photos of experimental aircraft spanning 70 years. Sarah recognized them. The U-2, the SR-71 Blackbird, the F-117 stealth fighter. Each had once been an impossible dream until engineers and test pilots turned it into reality. The hangar was even bigger than Sarah imagined, its high ceiling vanishing into shadow above glaring work lights. Yet it was impossible to look anywhere but at the machine in the center. The X-47 Delta dominated the space, its alien contours bending the light in ways that made the eyes doubt themselves. Up close, it was even stranger. Part sculpture, part predator. Its surfaces shifted subtly, the adaptive camouflage responding to her movements in the changing light. In its metamaterial skin, she caught fragmented, distorted reflections of herself. Dr. Harrison presented the helmet. The neural interface is fully integrated. Thousands of microsensors map your brain activity and translate thought into control inputs. Sarah studied it closely, noting the spider web of fine wires embedded in the padding. She'd worn helmets bristling with comm gear, targeting systems and night vision before. But this was something else entirely. This was human and machine fused at the level of thought itself. How long to adapt? She asked. For you? Harrison's lips twitched in the faintest smile. 6 to 8 hours in the simulator. The AI learns. Dr. Harrison's voice lost its usual measured calm, dipping into something weightier. Miss Mitchell, before we go any further, I need to warn you. Sarah watched him over the gleaming metal console, the faint hum of the hangar's lights filling the silence between them. The neural interface doesn't just read your commands. It locks into your consciousness, he explained. It adapts to your way of thinking, rewrites its algorithms to mirror your cognitive style. But in the temporal distortion field, reality itself becomes unstable. That connection could magnify any psychological side effects. You might lose track of where your thoughts end and the AI's begin. Sarah felt a cold prickle at the base of her neck. The very technology meant to give her the edge could just as easily turn into a trap, one that had already claimed other pilots. Still, she met his gaze steadily. Have you thought about the possibility that Captain Torres isn't trapped at all? Colonel Rodriguez turned toward her sharply. Dr. Harrison's brow furrowed. What exactly are you suggesting? And the colonel asked. I'm saying, what if she's staying in the field on purpose? What if she's found something that makes leaving dangerous or impossible? The two men exchanged a loaded glance. That's an interesting theory, Harrison said slowly. Why do you think that? Her transmissions, Sarah replied, stepping toward the X-47 Delta. Her eyes swept across its seamless, almost alien curves. She says the temporal displacement field is preventing her return, but she also warns us not to send a rescue. If she really wanted out, she'd be asking for help, not telling us to stay away. Up close, the aircraft seemed less like a machine and more like a creature, an apex predator of the skies, engineered to push the limits of flight. But Sarah was beginning to wonder if even this marvel was out of its depth. There's another thing, she continued. If this field is artificial, why hasn't its creator tried to communicate? Trapping one of our aircraft would be a perfect way to make contact, or demands. You think they're sending a message? Rodriguez asked. I think Captain Torres might be the message, Sarah said. She's allowed to transmit. She's alive. She's studying the phenomenon. That means whoever's behind this wants her to learn something. Maybe to pass it on. Harrison's expression shifted, understanding flickering in his eyes. That would explain why the field's expansion is so controlled. If this were purely defensive, they could have destroyed the aircraft outright. Sarah could feel pieces of the puzzle sliding into place, though the full picture remained maddeningly out of reach. Whatever was happening out there in the Bermuda Triangle defied not just their tactics, but their understanding of physics itself. "Colonel," she said, "I'll take the mission, but I want to change the approach." "How?" "Instead of trying to pull Torres and the plane out, I want to establish communication with whoever's running that field. If they wanted us dead, we would be. They're trying to tell us something. The only way to learn what is to go there and ask." Rodriguez's jaw tightened. "Miss Mitchell, that's not a rescue mission. That's diplomacy, with an unknown species, using technology we barely grasp. With respect, sir, I don't think we have a choice. The field's expanding whether we act or not. Torres is trapped whether we send a rescue or not, and whoever's doing this has already proven they can shut down our best tech like it's nothing." Her gaze returned to the X-47 Delta. The hangar lights rippled across its strange surfaces, reflections bending and shifting like they were alive. "The real question," she said quietly, "is whether we're going to let fear drive us into fighting something we don't understand, or try to learn what they want to teach us." The calibration began. Sarah sat in the cockpit, the neural interface helmet snug against her head. Harrison monitored her brainwaves on a wall of screens, every spike and dip mirrored against the aircraft's own responses. "Think about banking left," he instructed. She pictured the maneuver, and the Delta's control surfaces shifted instantly, as if the thought alone had set it in motion. The sensation was unnerving, intoxicating. In her 20 years of flying, nothing had ever felt like this. The aircraft didn't just obey, it anticipated, responding before she'd even fully formed the thought. "Let's try something bigger," Harrison said. "Combat roll, maximum climb." She imagined the impossible movement. The Delta's systems purred, readying for a maneuver that existed only in her head. The interface learned her faster than she could learn it, weaving itself into her instincts until she could no longer tell where her thoughts ended and the machine began. 6 hours later, the line between human and aircraft was almost gone. Rodriguez's voice broke through the hangar speakers. "Mitchell, we've got another transmission from Torres, coordinates, and a detailed map of the temporal field." Sarah pulled the helmet off and climbed down, her legs shaky from the strange intimacy of thought and machine. Harrison glanced at his readouts. "Your adaptation rate is extraordinary. 97% predictive accuracy already." They gathered around the secure terminal. The latest transmission was clearer, as if Torres had found a way to boost the signal. Day 28. "I've made contact with the entity controlling the field. It's not human, but it understands human psychology and our technology. The expansion isn't an attack, it's protection. Something is coming. They're trying to prepare us." A chill raced over Sarah's skin. Something is coming. Torres' voice was steady but urgent. "It calls itself the Navigator. It exists in multiple dimensions at once and has been watching us for centuries. The temporal field was created after it detected a convergence event, something that will permanently change Earth's place in the galaxy." "Did she say what kind of event?" Harrison asked under his breath. The recording continued. "Navigator says humanity's advances in stealth tech, AI, and quantum mechanics have reached a threshold. That threshold will draw the attention of less friendly civilizations. The field is both a shield and a test, to see if we're ready for broader contact while keeping out those who might exploit us." Sarah met the colonel's eyes. The weight of it all pressed down like a storm about to break. "The stealth aircraft that brought me here wasn't captured," Torres' voice went on. "It was invited. Navigator needed to study our best technology to see if we could defend ourselves against what's coming. My conclusion, we're not ready, but we have potential." Static crackled. "I'm sending upgrade schematics, things that might give us a chance. But understand this, the field will collapse in 72 hours. When it does, Earth will be visible to those who see us as a threat or a resource." Silence gripped the hangar after the recording ended, the kind of silence that seemed to deepen the longer it lingered. Sarah stood motionless, her gaze locked on the X-47 Delta as its adaptive skin shifted almost imperceptibly in the shifting glow of the overhead lights. The aircraft wasn't just another piece of military hardware. It was the pinnacle of human engineering, the most advanced machine ever to take to the skies. And yet, if Captain Torres was to be believed, it still might not be enough for what lay ahead. Colonel, she asked, her voice steady but edged with doubt, are we seriously planning to base our entire response to a possible galactic first contact on the word of a pilot who's been stuck inside a temporal anomaly for nearly a month? Across from her, Colonel Rodriguez didn't flinch. Miss Mitchell, at this moment, Captain Torres has more first-hand intelligence on the situation than anyone else on the planet. And frankly, her technical specifications check out. The upgrade she's recommending would make the X-47 Delta far more capable. Dr. Harrison, hunched over her tablet, didn't look up. She was scrolling through lines of streaming data, her expression shifting from curiosity to something closer to awe. These modifications, they're sound, at least in theory, but they're decades ahead of anything we've developed. Whoever or whatever this navigator is, it understands our technology better than we do. Sarah moved closer to the aircraft, running her hand along the warm, almost organic surface of its metamaterial skin. Under her fingertips, the surface responded, tiny ripples of color blooming and fading as if it were alive. If Captain Torres was telling the truth, this machine wouldn't just be a rescue craft. It would carry her beyond the familiar edges of human experience, into the unknown, as humanity's first envoy to a galactic community they had no preparation to join. What exactly are the recommended upgrades? She asked without looking away from the aircraft. Dr. Harrison checked her notes. Enhanced neural interface protocols, capable of processing information at speeds that push into the superhuman range. Weapons systems that manipulate electromagnetic fields rather than using conventional explosives. And most critically, a quantum communication array, allowing instantaneous contact across any distance. How long to make those modifications? Rodriguez glanced at his watch. His voice clipped. If we mobilize every available technician and work without stopping, 48 hours. That leaves us 24 hours before the temporal field collapses. The weight of it pressed down on her. Accept the upgrades and she'd be piloting technology never tested in real combat. Refuse and she'd be flying straight into an encounter with unknown forces armed with weapons that might as well be museum relics. Rodriguez's tone hardened. There's something else. The navigator has agreed to a face-to-face, but only with the pilot who flies the upgraded X-47 Delta. Captain Torres has provided coordinates for a rendezvous point. It's at the exact center of the temporal field. Sarah frowned. We're talking about an entity that exists in multiple dimensions at once? That's what Torres claims. According to her, the navigator can project a form human consciousness can process. But understand this, you'd be stepping far outside any mission parameters we've ever dealt with. First contact with a non-human intelligence, under circumstances we can't predict or control. She looked around the hangar. Dozens of technicians had already started work, hands moving with the tense precision of people who knew failure wasn't an option. Humanity's future might depend on the accuracy of every adjustment they made. What does the navigator want from this meeting? She asked. Rodriguez didn't hesitate. According to Torres, it wants to decide whether humanity deserves protection or whether we're a threat that needs to be contained. Whatever we say, whatever you do out there, it'll shape how the rest of the galaxy sees us. Dr. Harrison finally looked up, her voice low but charged with urgency. Miss Mitchell, if even half of what Torres has reported is accurate, this is the single most important moment in human history. The navigator's judgment could mean joining a galactic civilization or facing isolation, or worse. Sarah had flown combat missions where losing meant lives were lost, missions that pushed her to the very edge of skill and endurance. But those were still human battles, waged with weapons and tactics born of centuries of evolution in war. This was something else entirely. She would be standing as the sole representative of her species before an intelligence whose perception of reality might be beyond her comprehension. She looked straight at Rodriguez. I need to know, do you believe Captain Torres is still mentally sound? Extended isolation in a distorted temporal field could cause hallucinations, false memories, even total psychological collapse. We've had 3 psychiatrists review her transmissions, Rodriguez replied. Their consensus? She's displaying extraordinary stability under conditions that would break most people. Her technical reports are precise, internally consistent, and contain information no human could have fabricated. Sarah nodded slowly, taking it in but not discarding her caution. Military psych evaluations were thorough, but none had ever accounted for a human mind surviving inside a warped bubble of space-time. The next 36 hours vanished in a blur. Modifications, system diagnostics, non-stop briefings that strained the limits of known science. Piece by piece, the X-47 Delta was transformed. Less an aircraft now than a fusion of human ingenuity and alien design. Its skin was threaded with quantum field manipulators, able to bend electromagnetic radiation in ways that rendered human stealth technology obsolete. The neural interface was rebuilt from the inside out, designed to let her process information and make decisions nearly as fast as the plane's AI. Harrison warned that using the interface could permanently alter her brain, but the alternative, going in blind, was worse. By dawn on mission day, Sarah stood in the briefing room, eyes fixed on satellite imagery of the temporal field. It had spread, now covering nearly 2,000 square miles of ocean. Commercial traffic had been rerouted hundreds of miles, choking vital Atlantic trade. Once you're inside, we'll lose all standard comms, Rodriguez said. The quantum array should let you speak to Torres, and possibly the navigator. But we won't be able to track you or offer support. Sarah gave a single nod. She would be utterly alone. The aircraft had the range to get her to the rendezvous point and back, if the upgrades worked, if she survived the meeting. And if I don't come back? Rodriguez's answer was blunt. Officially, there's no plan. Unofficially, we wait 20 hours past your ETA. Then we start preparing for the collapse of the field and whatever comes after. In the hangar, under the harsh white of the floodlights, the X-47 Delta waited. Its skin now shimmered with subtle patterns that shifted if she changed her angle or focus, as though the machine itself were watching her. Technicians moved like surgeons in an operating theater, checking every last system. Dr. Harrison approached, carrying the new neural interface helmet, bulkier than before, its interior webbed with sensors and microprocessors for the quantum systems. Sarah, she said softly, no matter what happens, you'll be carrying the hopes and fears of our entire species. But more than that, you'll be carrying our curiosity, our need to understand where we fit in the universe. Sarah accepted the helmet. It was heavy, not just in her hands, but in what it represented. In a matter of hours, she'd be stepping into a reality no human had ever experienced, to learn whether they were alone or part of something far larger. As she climbed into the cockpit for what might be the last time, her thoughts drifted to Riverside Municipal Airport. Marcus Chun still wrestling with crosswind landings, Jennifer Walsh prepping for her medical supply runs, Frank Morrison inspiring the next generation to fall in love with the sky. They embodied the gentler side of flight, the joy of moving through familiar skies toward destinations you could see, chart, and trust. This time, there would be no such certainty. Sarah was about to launch herself towards something unlike anything she had ever faced. A mission that carried the staggering weight of deciding what kind of universe the next generation of students would inherit. The X-47 Delta's systems hummed to life with a whispering, flawless precision. The neural interface linked seamlessly with her brainwaves, producing that now familiar shift in perception, when the aircraft ceased to be a mere machine and became a living extension of her own thoughts. Yet this time something was different. The upgraded systems were sharper, quicker, more like an instinct than a response. It felt as though the last fragile line dividing pilot from machine had dissolved entirely. She taxied down the runway, the morning lights spilling across the Nevada desert. Her final thought before takeoff was startling in its simplicity. Whatever she found inside the temporal field, she would face it not only as an envoy for the whole of humanity, but as a pilot who had learned to find a rare kind of peace in the open sky. Even if that sky now opened into the unknown. The X-47 Delta rose effortlessly into the pale dawn. Its adaptive skin was already bending light around its revolutionary frame, rendering its form almost invisible against the horizon. Behind her, the most classified facility on Earth pressed forward in its relentless quest to stretch the limits of what humanity could achieve. Ahead lay an expanse that defied the rules she had always known, a place where time itself shifted speeds, where reality rewrote itself moment by moment, and where something alien waited, poised to decide the fate of her species. Sarah Mitchell, who had been nothing more than a flight instructor less than 2 days ago, now carried the hopes and future of humankind toward a rendezvous with the infinite.